Hello there guys, I'm Unstable Voltage and today I'm going to be taking a look at a game called Planetbase. This is an interesting new indie title from a developer called Madruga Works, and it's quite a small team. The main design and programming of the game was done by just one person. The entire team, if you count the artists and the musician, I think there's about 5 people involved, not counting all of the testers and such, but still a very small team. And this is the game that they have come up with. The key that I'm using here has been provided freely by the developer for review purposes, and we're going to go in. I'm going to give you my first impressions of the game. I'm going to start by showing you a new game and just showing you how you get started off, and then we'll go in and look at a game that I've been playing for a little bit just so you can see a bit further into the scenario. Now, I've been playing this game for a few hours. I've restarted a couple of times because it is a little bit tricky to begin with, and if I had to liken it to something else that you might already be familiar with, I'd draw comparisons to games such as Banished. Basically, it is a colony survival game. You start off with a limited amount of resources and a small number of colonists, and you have to basically survive the landscape. You have to grow your colony, build extra buildings, gain extra people, and just try and survive everything that the environment throws at you. Except this time, it's actually based in space, or at least based on an alien planet. So first of all, before we do anything else, just a quick look at the settings. This is a Unity engine game, so the graphics options are quite Spartan. The quality settings are just the general Unity presets. It does have AA, which is quite nice. It doesn't say which type of AA it is. It's probably FXAA, with it being Unity, but it's nice that that option has been included. And then you've got individual volume options for the sound effects and music, so it's pretty basic. Even though this game has been created by such a small team, the graphics are actually quite good. It looks quite polished, and the visuals certainly do serve the game well enough. So let's go in and hit new game. And essentially you have 3 different planets that you can build on. Now at the moment I've only got one of these planets unlocked. I haven't managed to unlock the other 2 yet. You unlock these by hitting these various milestones, which is achieved by reaching a certain number of population, or surviving for a certain amount of time, or building certain buildings, certain units, and things like that. And that will unlock these other planets. Now these different planets have various different statistics. So for example, if we look at this one here, the class D planet, and it tells us that its atmosphere partially protects it from meteors and solar flares. It has a high amount of light, which is useful because most of your power comes from solar. It has high density atmosphere, which means you can use wind turbines as well. There's a high risk of sandstorms, but the risk of meteors and solar flares is very low. If we go back and look at the other planets, it's not letting me actually see it here, but the other planets will have different statistics. They'll be more likely to have meteor strikes, there'll be less light, and things like that. So once you choose the planet you want to start on, you can actually go and choose the starting location. It just gives you the degrees in coordinates down here. You can give it a name. Now it is quite important where you start, because sometimes you can end up starting in a spot where you don't have an awful lot of room to build, and unfortunately you can't really tell from this screen exactly what sort of location you're going to be in until you've actually gone and started. So I'm just going to go and see if I can start at the default location, which is always around sort of north 0, it's always sort of on the equator. Let's go ahead and start a game, just so that I can show you how the basic construction works within Planetbase. So it loads in quite quickly. Nice little animated intro here as we land. So this is our landing module. This will contain our initial colonists and also some supplies to get us started. So we do have a handful of resources. So every time I've started, it's always been the same. Your colonists are colour-coded, so the blue ones are workers, then you get 2 biologists, you get 1 engineer, and you get 1 medic. And you also get these 2 little robots, one of which is a carrier, very good at moving stuff around, and the other one is this constructor bot. Now, the first thing I will say here is there isn't actually a pause button. You can speed the game up or slow it down to speed 1, but there's no way to actually pause, so I'm just going to get straight on and do stuff. If we click on the colony ship here, you can see we have a variety of materials to get us started off. We have some metals, we have some bioplastics, we have some meals, It's all pasta with the look of things. We have some spares and we have some medicinal supplies. We can also see that if we hit the Alt key, it'll pop up here in the top right hand corner. So the first thing we need to do is start building some buildings. Now as you can see, we've got quite a bit of room to build here. You can only really build on the flat land. And just to give you sort of an idea of the size of the map, we can sort of come all the way down to here. There isn't really a way to zoom out. We are zoomed out as far as we can. But as you can see, we've moved quite a distance away from the landing module, and we can pretty much move that distance in any direction. So there's quite a lot of space to expand. As you can see, there are already some meteors coming down, so you do have to be careful with those, because if they hit your structures, they can damage them. So we're going to start off by building an indoor building. There's very few things that you can start off by building, but one of the first things we want to do is build an oxygen generator, because obviously we need somewhere for our colonists to go so they can breathe. Now, as you'll see, units will start to fetch the resources from the landing pod and carry them over to the construction plate. Now, it's quite like a lot of these sort of survival city building games. You don't have direct control over the units, as a lot of these meteors are getting very close. But this is our first building. This is going to be our oxygen generator. Now, in order for that to function, it's going to need a few extra bits and pieces. It's going to need a couple of outdoor buildings. First of all, it is going to need some sort of power. So we'll build a solar panel and then we will connect it up. We're also going to need water, so we will build a water extractor over here and we will connect that up as well. Now, the important thing to note on this game is that once you've put down your initial structure, all of the structures must be connected to it. The external structures, like these ones, they just carry water and power between each other. But your internal structures will actually have walkways where your colonists can move around inside the base. But it's certainly an important thing to take into consideration, because you have to be able to connect all of your buildings together. If you can't do that, then things become a little bit stuck. And there's a limit to how you can put buildings next to each other. So let's say I want to build my next building, which will be an airlock, so that my people can get inside. As you can see, if I move this structure near the O2 generator, it turns green, and you can see the line showing how it will connect up. I can't build too far away because it's not connected, and I also can't build too close. And I can't build over here because it has to be next to an existing interior structure. So we're going to go ahead and pop it over here. And then we need to join them together. We'll click on the two of them and we get an extra little button. So one of the first gripes that I have in this game is that once you've told them to start constructing something, some of them it will allow you to recycle, but some things it won't. And this can be a little bit annoying in some cases. As it says, recycling this construction would split the base in two. But I have had problems before where you're trying to build a couple of buildings and you don't quite have enough resources to complete them both, and your workers have already taken some resources to one building site and they've taken half the resources to another building site. Now, if you could cancel one of the buildings, you could take all of the resources to one site and maybe finish a building. And I've had a couple of instances where I've wanted to cancel a construction because it's had 3 or 4 resources waiting there, but it's not had enough resources to complete. And I wasn't able to cancel the building and reclaim the resources. So that is one little problem that I'd like to see fixed. I'd like to be able to cancel a building even if it's part way through construction, or especially if it's just waiting for resources, because it doesn't always seem to be possible. So we've got our first couple of buildings. There's another couple of things that we do need to build. Now, all this stuff is sort of taught to you in the tutorial, which is quite comprehensive. It goes through most of the basic buildings. We're going to go ahead here and we are going to build a canteen, which will allow us to feed our population here. Now, one thing that I'm also going to build is I'm going to tell them to build an external structure, and I'm going to build a power collector. That will go out here. Now, this will give me 2 lines because it's in range of 2 structures, but I'll only usually be able to connect it to one of them. Sometimes you can connect it up to multiple structures, but each time you build one of these connections, it costs you more resources. So here you can see we've already had our first problem, which is the power outage. Now, the main reason for that here is because I had the game pause. Well, I didn't have the game pause and I've been talking, so I've actually sort of fell behind what I should have been doing. So what I'm also going to do is go and get a wind turbine. We'll get that connected up. So we've got no power, and there's a few people running out of oxygen already. What we're going to do is we're just going to speed the game up to full speed in the hope that we can get all of these buildings built. We'll just go and turn the canteen off so that it isn't using any power. And hopefully we'll get over here and get these buildings built quickly enough. There we go. We now have a wind turbine. We're producing power. That means we'll be able to start making O2. Now, this is one of the other issues that I have with games like this. And I'm not using this as a reason to pick on Planetbase. I think it's a bit of an issue that all games of this genre have. And that is at the start of the game, you're pretty much limited to having to build all of the buildings in a certain order. It's okay trying to be... Oh, sounds like someone's just died there. They're out of oxygen. Okay, well, I think that's the first time I've actually ever lost anybody. Maybe the medic will come and help them or something. I do not know. But they've just run out of O2 there. Now, one problem you do have here, of course, is the airlocks. Because the airlocks actually cycle quite slowly. So I've already lost 2 colonists by asphyxiation. Quite interesting there, because I've never actually lost a colonist before while playing this game. So I'm just going to put that down to me talking and not doing things at full speed. So once you've got some of the buildings built, like this one here, this is the canteen, we can then click on the upgrade button and we can start adding things to it. So we could go and put a table in there, we can put a water fountain so people can drink, and we can put up a TV which will give them some basic entertainment, help to keep their morale going. So you have certain options on these buildings that you can do. So you've got the upgrade option, you can recycle them, get some of your materials back, and you can also disable them so they don't use any power. We're also going to need a bunk for our workers, so we can go ahead and build ourselves a dorm. So again, you need somewhere to connect it to. Now, there are certain buildings, and the dorm is one of them, that only allow one connection. So I couldn't build another building over here and connect it to the back of the dorm, because it only allows one connection. It would be nice if the game specified that. I don't always believe that it does. Yeah, it just says... yeah, this structure can only have one interior connection, so it does actually list it there. So once you build one of these, you've got to be very, very careful you don't build yourself into a corner where you're unable to carry on building in a certain direction. So now we've got our drinking fountain, these astronauts here which are running out of water. If you click on your individual people, you can see what all of their needs are. You can also see what their profession is, and you can also see what they're currently doing. So that's basically how you get the game started. And like I said, the issue you have is that you pretty much have to build everything in the same order at the start of the game. Because you only have a limited amount of resources, and you have a certain amount of needs that you have to fulfill. You also can't mess around, because as you can see, because I was a little bit slow, I only stopped for a few minutes to explain what I was doing, and that was enough for me to run into night time and run out of power. So you really do have to speed things up. And I certainly think it's one of those games where the first couple of attempts you have, it's going to go wrong. Until you've played it a couple of times and you realise what you need to build in what order, then you'll know how to do it. Once you know how to do it, you can't really deviate from it. And that's the only downside I have with games like this, is that the beginning, maybe half an hour of the game, tends to be quite boring. And it's hard to say that without it sounding really negative, but by boring, all I mean is it's repetitive. That first 20 to 30 minutes always tends to be the same, you know. And if we're using this game as an example, you build your oxygen generator, you build your airlock, you build your canteen, you build your oxygen generator, you build your solar panel and your water extractor. Now, in the tutorial, it teaches you to build the water extractor and the solar panel, but the tutorial is perpetual daylight. It never goes into nighttime. Now, the problem is, the moment nighttime comes, your solar panels do nothing. So you need to either have built a power collector, which is a giant battery, or built a wind turbine to keep power generating at night. So the tutorial doesn't teach you that at the beginning. So if you follow the build order that the tutorial gives you on your first game, this is exactly what will happen. You'll run out of power, and then you'll run out of oxygen, and people will asphyxiate. So it tends to be the same build order. Oxygen generator, power, water, airlock, dorm, airlock, canteen, dorm. And I think the next thing from that went on to build a a biodome, which is essentially a building where you can, it's a hydroponics bay, it's where you build your grow your plants, and that allows you to go ahead and produce your own food. So all of the time we're using these resources that are in the colony ship, and eventually we will run out. Now there are ways to replenish them. So for example, the metals that we use, we can get that by building a mine up against the side of a mountain, and then we need a factory to, well, not a factory, we would need a processing plant, I believe it is. Yeah, a processing plant would allow us to produce the metal. We can also use the processing plant to produce the bioplastic, but that requires starch as a raw material, and that will come from the biodome. We've also got things like food. Again, food is made by growing plants in the biodome, and then we make them in a meal maker in the canteen. And then we've got things like spare parts that are built in factories. Medical supplies are produced in a lab, and it's made from medicinal plants that are also grown in the biodome. So you've got lots of these buildings that all work together. Now, one thing I haven't built yet that you can build is a landing platform that allows you to call extra colonists into your base to help. So that means you can replace anyone that dies, and you can also grow. Now, you can also get rid of this thing if you want to give yourself a little bit more room. What we can do is we can go ahead and recycle it, and all of the stuff that was inside gets put on the floor. And also we get some extra materials because we get the materials from recycling the landing module. Now, at the moment we don't have a storeroom. We can build a storeroom. Anything that's just left lying around on the ground will start to deteriorate and eventually vanish. So you don't want to get rid of your landing ship too early on. The game does pop up with a little sort of tip and says you should recycle your landing ship, but my advice is don't recycle it until the last possible minute. The resources that you start with in the lander do last a little bit longer than other stuff before it deteriorates, but it's still something you should really think about waiting on. So let me go ahead and load in a another game. One that I was playing around on earlier, if I can find it. There we go. So this was almost an identical start because, as I said, you do end up building pretty much the same buildings in the same order. Oxygen generator, solar panel, water collector, airlock, canteen, dorm, biodome. This is our processing plant here. Now you can see all of these things have these little covers on them. If we hit tab, we can actually make all of those things go away so we can see inside them. So we have some extra things in here. We have a storeroom, which is now where we're keeping all of our goods, and one of our robots is broken down. So this is another thing. Buildings, machines and robots do break down over time, and they require spare parts to fix, and also one of your engineers will go off and fix them. Now, one thing that I have noticed that is a little bit problematic was a couple of issues that I do have with the game. Let's go through the negatives that I have. First of all, the pathfinding sometimes can be a little bit derpy. I have seen, for example, one of my colonists go in one direction, then stop and double back because they realised that they'd come to a dead end. I've also seen instances, like in this area here, where one of my colonists will stand on the inside when he completes the last walkway and end up trapped inside the walkways and then can't get out, which means he'll either die of starvation or die of asphyxiation. And the only way to rescue him is to basically go ahead and destroy one of the walkways, which can be problematic. Another issue that I've got is you can't directly prioritise what your colonists do. To a certain degree, you can prioritise certain buildings. So we could, for example, go over here to our biodome and click this button, which says prioritise work in this structure. I want you to put all your efforts into keeping these things running, as a meteor comes down very, very close to one of my solar panels there. But the problem that I have noticed is that there are certain things, like these two robots you start with. You start with the constructor robot, and you start with the carrier, who's disappeared off somewhere. I can't see where he is. Now, the problem is these robots break down. As you can see, they have their condition, and they have their integrity. Now, once their integrity gets down to 0, they break down more often, and they basically end up needing repairs in the form of spare parts. Now, their condition... Once their condition gets low, the engineer needs to repair them. Now, if we look at the constructor bot, for example, and I'm going to use this as an example because I've seen it happen a couple of times. The constructor bot is by far your best asset for building constructions. He can build things faster than anybody else. And looks like we've had a trading ship. We'll talk about trading ships shortly. Now, the problem that I have is when the construction bot breaks down, an engineer could go and repair the construction bot. What I've noticed, though, is the engineers tend to take over the construction duties. The engineers will go around and start repairing buildings and start constructing buildings. But if they actually repaired the construction bot first, the construction bot could go around and do the building and repairs much more efficiently. It would be nice if you could sort of prioritise the order, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So we've got a landing pad here. Having a landing pad allows us to do a few things, such as we can turn it on to allow new colonists in, and traders and visitors. If we go to a trading ship, we can trade away resources that we have in stock in exchange for just basic currency, cash, or we can swap them for things like various different types of robots that can be used to increase our production. Now, you do have to be careful, and again, this is an issue that all games of this genre sort of have. And that is, if you grow your base too quickly in terms of your facilities, you'll suddenly realise that you start to run out of resources, and you only have a very limited amount of workforce to be able to generate new resources. On the other hand, if you actually bring too many colonists in before your base can support them, then you'll find that you end up running out of food, running out of water, you'll eventually run out of power. And that's why this is the sort of game where you're probably going to have to do a few restarts, because the first few times you do it, things are probably going to start to go wrong. So I think what I should do here, because food has been an issue for me in the past, is I should go ahead and build myself another biodome. Now, one thing you can do with these buildings is if you use the mouse wheel, you can actually change the size. And obviously having a larger building allows you to get more stuff inside it. At the same time, it does become more costly in terms of materials. Now, it's quite tempting to go, oh, we'll just get the biggest one now, because getting the biggest one now will save me from having to build another one later. But sometimes building the smaller ones, especially early on, are more efficient, because the bigger ones draw more power. So the moment you build one of the bigger buildings, you're going to have to spend more resources to build it. You're going to have to spend more resources by building additional power. As you can see, one of our solar panels is already down here and the repair bot is repairing it. We also have a habit of running out of spare parts as well. So it really is a matter of trying to find a good balance between them. Now, here's the security center, which isn't quite finished yet. I'd like to get a security console in there. You can get intruders, you can get raided by hostiles, and you can get security guards, you can give them guns, you can build guns for your colonists as well. And you can also build storage facilities of different types. Now, this is where the crux of the game comes in. The game doesn't have any sort of campaign mode, so the only option you have is this sandbox build mode. Now, for some games that has worked quite well. I mean, Banished was a very successful and popular game, and I know that game can be modded, but the mod support didn't come initially. When that game first came out, all it had was the sandbox mode. Now, you do have various achievements and milestones that you can get in this game. So there are Steam achievements for doing various things. There are also these milestones, which are used to unlock the other two types of planets. So the first one is surviving for 1 day. The second one is just getting new colonists. The third one is building certain processors. And then you get things like reaching 100 population, getting 10 robots, getting 100 prestige, building a monolith, reaching more population, so on and so forth. Now, they're quite difficult to rush, and this is the thing. This is a game about balance. You have to grow slowly. You have to make sure that you keep enough population to keep your base running, and you have to make sure that your base is running well enough to support the population. If you let one of them grow more quickly than the other, then you'll get an imbalance and things will start to go very, very wrong for you. And it can be really, really difficult to recover when something like that starts to happen. As you can see here, I'm already having an issue where I'm trying to build a new facility and nothing's happening because these facilities are waiting on resources. and I don't have any. I've run out of bioplastics and I've run out of metal. Now, they're being produced over here in the processing plant by the engineers. The raw material for the bioplastic is coming from the starch, which is coming from here, and the raw materials for the metal is coming from the mine, which is over here, but they all require workers, and it takes a little bit of time. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you get more colonists, because more colonists means that you can work the different facilities at a faster rate, and therefore produce more resources. But therein lies the negative. The more colonists you have, the more food you use, and if you run out of food, your colonists basically put down their tools and stop working. We've got a sandstorm coming in here, so I can go ahead and go to my security controls and put the base on yellow alert. And that will basically tell all of my staff to remain indoors as much as they can. Now, they will have to get around to an airlock. I should probably go and build another airlock over here somewhere, just to make it a little bit easier for people to get in if they're around the outside. Especially these guys, of course, because they've just had to walk all the way around from the landing pad. In fact, I think having an airlock over here would be better, because then we'd have a very, very close route to the landing pad. And that's also useful for trading, because you have to take the stuff you're trading away out to the trade ship and then bring the stuff you've traded for back into the base. The problem is, if I build another airlock, it's going to require more raw materials, it's going to use more electricity, it's going to use more water, and that will delay me in building something else. So you really have to stop before you build anything and think to yourself, do I really need to build this now? Can I survive without it? If I go ahead and build it, am I just wasting raw materials? And that is quite an important thing to get that balance right. You do have some various graphs and statistics, so we can go in here and look at the stats. You can actually see what our welfare is. So this is basically how happy everybody is within our base, and it counts a number of things such as their health, their hunger level, their morale, how much water they have, their fatigue, and things like that. And then you've got the prestige. The more prestige you have, the more likely you are to get new colonists or new settlers, whatever you want to call them. You can see at a glance what type of people you currently have in the colony, you can see what type of bots you have, and you can see a list of your resources. Now, the game also has a built-in encyclopedia of sorts, which you can click by hitting the question mark on any of the help panels, and that will give you various information about the screen that you're on, and it gives you hot links to various other sections. So you can read about things like manufacturing limits, we can go and read about metal, we can read about ore and the metal processor. So it's got a built-in help file, which is actually very, very useful. There's also an index to it where you can just go and look at things very specifically, such as text, which you can get when you can buy text from traders, and they allow you to build some extra buildings and things that you can't normally get without them. So we're still going on through this yellow alert. There are a couple of different types of alert that you can have once you've built your security room, and they are basically no alert, yellow alert, which keeps all of your colonists indoors and makes your medics and security guards work extra time. And let's go ahead and turn that alert off because the sandstorm's finished and the noise is atrocious. And also there is red alert, which will basically call all of your settlers to arms, providing you've got guns to give them. And that's useful if the base gets invaded or if things get a little bit overwhelming. So our construction robot has finished building the biodome. Now, I can't actually build any of the upgrades in the biodome yet because we don't have the walkway connecting them up. Once that walkway is done, we'll be able to go ahead and build some extra things in the biodome. Hopefully get some additional food going. So there we go, we've got an engineer out there. He's going to finish the walkway. Takes a little bit of time for the oxygen to filter through from the rest of the base. But now that that's done, we can go ahead and we can build some more food buildings in here. Now, you do have to be careful with some of these because they all have bonuses and they all have downsides. So The white one here is the medicinal plant. It's the only medicinal plant. All of these sort of yellowy, orange coloured foods are starchy foods. Now, they do produce food, but they also produce starch, which is used for making bioplastics. Then you've got all of the red stuff. Now, the red stuff is all food, but some of it has different levels of maintenance. So if we look here, the tomato has high maintenance. It's going to break down more often and require repairing more often, but it produces food more quickly. You've also got things like the mushrooms, which produces food more slowly, but has a very low maintenance cost. You've also then got things like trees, which produce oxygen in the day, but use oxygen at night. I'm not too sure how a tree consumes oxygen, but there you go. That's the way it works in the mechanics of this game. And that essentially does two things. First of all, it produces oxygen, and secondly, it gives a little bit of morale for your colonists because they can sit around and look at pretty trees, I suppose. So we're trying to make sure that we don't starve. Currently, I've got no food here at all. If we actually hit Alt, we can see that I do have some vegetables, which is used for making food, but I currently only have one meal in storage, and we're not going to have that for a huge amount of time either, especially as we now have 16 colonists. So what I really want to do is get these hydroponics bays built so that we can start growing some more food. But of course the problem we've got at the moment is we are missing resources. We're actually missing the bioplastics. So in order to make bioplastics, somebody needs to be working this bioplastic processor, and currently nobody is. Here comes another engineer. Maybe he's going to go and do it. Yep, there we go. So someone's actually working on that now. So we can go ahead and we can speed the game up, and hopefully good things will happen. Now, you'll also find that there is a certain randomness to things as well, such as the meteor strikes. If a meteor does manage to land and hit one of your structures or one of the connections, it will need to be repaired. And that can be quite devastating if it lands here, for example, and severs my water supply and power supply from the main base. So it's often useful to have a second water and or power supply over in another direction, because that will mean if one of them gets severed, at least you will still have power and water going to the base. We've got another trading ship. This guy doesn't have an awful lot of useful stuff. He does have some metal, though, that could be quite useful, and some bioplastics. So what we could do is see, well, how much could we afford to give away? We don't want to give away our spare parts. We don't want to give away our medical supplies. We could probably afford to give away some of our medicinal plants, because I don't have a lab yet, so I can't even use my medicinal plants. And then I could go ahead and buy up some metals. We'd like to get some bioplastics as well. Let's just go ahead and get rid of... Right, can't quite afford to get all of them. Let's just give the whole lot away. 108, we can't do it. We can only get 2. Let's just take the rest in cash, because we can use that cash later on with another trade mission. So now that I've told my colonists to trade, you'll see people will start picking things up out of the storeroom and taking them outside to the ship, which is another reason why I really should have an airlock over here. Now, the storage rooms only store a certain amount of stuff. Luckily, it's mostly empty because we're getting rid of a lot of it. Our food stocks are low, which is going to be a problem. Again, building storage rooms, they are one of those rooms that you can build various different sizes, and again, it does cost more materials to build one of the larger ones, so you still have to be careful. But as you can see, we're still waiting on these hydroponics bays to be constructed because we just don't have the bioplastics yet to do it. We will do soon. As soon as we've taken everything out here, the trade ship flies off and leaves behind the stuff we traded for. And the workers and hopefully the carrier bot should bring everything in. Some of it will go to storage if it's not needed, but the bioplastics are being brought straight here and an engineer's building the hydroponics space. So there is a certain amount of automation to it. It's quite nice. It always reminds me of Settlers. I think Settlers was the first ever sort of base building or settlement building strategy game where I didn't have direct control over the population. You just say what you want built and the population basically assigns itself a job. Of course, if people are hungry, they'll go off and eat. If people are tired, they'll go off and sleep, and you don't really have any say or control in that. So you do have to make sure that you keep all of their needs satisfied. Otherwise, as I said, you fall into that pitfall where your population becomes unhappy, they stop working, and once they stop working, you're essentially screwed at that point, because it's very difficult then to dig yourself out of that hole. If you run out of food and your population is starving, they'll refuse to work. And if they refuse to work, then it's very, very difficult to get them to produce food or produce other goods that you can trade for food. So you do have to be very, very careful there. So all in all, what are my opinions on this game? Well, from what I've played of it, I do actually quite like it. I think the design is very good. I love the aesthetic. I love the space theme. It reminds me quite a lot of the Martian, the recent Matt Damon movie that's just come out, because I've seen that quite recently, and I thought it was actually really good timing to bring this game out around about the same time as that movie, because it looks like the Hab. You've got all of these sort of interconnected modules making up a base on an alien planet, and I quite like the idea behind that. And even though, as I said at the beginning of this video, it was made by a very small indie dev team, the game actually looks really, really good. I mean, it's very, very functional. You can't zoom in very far, so it doesn't matter too much about texture quality. The animation quality is okay. It's not the best, but I mean, nothing looks particularly bad. The walking animation's generally fine, even though they do seem to sort of moonwalk a little bit sometimes. But it's perfectly functional. I haven't noticed any performance issues with the game whatsoever, but, you know, it's a Unity engine game, so it runs quite well on most systems. The only things that I have about this game on the sort of negative side of things is that I feel it could do with some more goals. It's nice that it has those milestones in there, but there's only 10 of them. It would be nice if maybe later on they expanded it, added some more milestones, maybe add some more options for different buildings and things, because at the moment I think I worked out there's probably a total of about 30 buildings. Yeah, there's 15 buildings there, which are internal buildings. These are the external buildings. That's the back arrow. So there's 29 buildings currently. It would be nice maybe to see a few more. It would also be nice maybe to have some sort of campaign. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a sandbox, but some people actually like to have goals. They like to have a win condition or something to aim for. At the moment, the only thing you can do is sort of set your own goals, which is generally try and reach the highest population that you can. And that comes back to maintaining that balance. You have to very, very carefully increase the size of your base so that you can sustain a higher population. And you have to very, very carefully increase the size of your population to build and maintain a larger base. Try and rush one before the other, and you'll end up getting yourself into an unrecoverable mess. But that said, I have enjoyed the time that I have been playing this. I certainly think that I will put some more time into it. I'd certainly like to reach a couple of those milestones. I'd love to be able to get up to the 300 population. I'd love to be able to go and see one of the other planets. But I think the issue is that once you've made a mistake and things go wrong, it very much does become a question of thinking, right, I'm now going to have to go back and start the game again, or reload from a save. So what I would suggest maybe is, once you get to a certain point in the game where you think, okay, everything's going okay, nobody's starving, we've got food, I've got most of my base sorted out, make a save game. Because at least then, later on, when you take on another colony ship full of people and suddenly run out of food because you've got so many mouths to feed, at least you can roll back to that previous save and go, well, okay, I'll go back to that save, and this time I'll stop new colonists coming in and build some extra food processing plant first. Because I think that is preferable to going back and restarting the game from the beginning, because every time you restart the game from the beginning, you pretty much have to do the same thing. And again, it's building the oxygen generator, building the power, building the water, building the canteen, building the dorm. And you sort of think, well, I know that's the correct combination of doing things, because if I do anything else, it doesn't work. So that means I've got to build those same 4 or 5 buildings pretty much the same every time. So what you may as well do is build those buildings and then go, right, that's done, and I know that I can't do that any more optimally than I already have, so I'm going to save there. And then if I have to come back and restart, I can just restart from that point. That would be the way that I would personally do it, because sometimes you get to a point where everything is going really, really well. You have a really good colony, you have a decent amount of population, you've got a lot of the stuff built, you've spent maybe a few hours building it, and then one little mistake will go and screw it up for you, and you're like, oh no, I've got to start from scratch again. And then you spend the first 30 minutes to an hour doing exactly the same thing that you did on the previous game. And I think that could end up being a little bit repetitive, especially if you end up having to do it a little bit too much. We could go ahead here and trade away some of our metals and get ourselves some food. And go ahead and pay the difference with monies. So yeah, I would certainly say if you're the sort of person that likes sandbox games, if you like free building, and particularly if you've played games like Banished and you enjoy just being able to build and grow and expand, and you don't have any sort of particular goals, you don't have a single player campaign or any particular win conditions, if you're happy with that sort of freestyle building for the sake of it, I think you'll really enjoy this game. If you enjoyed Banished, I think you will really enjoy this game. If you are looking for something that actually has goals to work towards, unless you are able to sort of make your own goals, then I think it may become a little bit repetitive for you in the long run. That said, you can still probably put a fair few hours into this, and it's not the most expensive game. It's currently on Steam. Its full price is £15, which I'm assuming is probably going to be around $20. I haven't seen the US price. It is currently on sale though, because it literally has just released today on Friday the 16th of October. So I guess it's just on sale for its sort of launch week. But I think even if you pick this game up and get 10-20 hours enjoyment out of it, for the price, that is probably worth it. I mean, let's be honest. You go out and buy a movie ticket for $10-15 and that only lasts you a couple of hours. So if you pick this game up for $15-20 and you get 5 hours out of it, then you've had value for money. But if the developer does end up watching this video, my suggestion would be consider the possibility of adding some DLC in the future to put in some sort of campaign. It doesn't have to be anything that's really scripted. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, we're not looking for sort of cutscenes and a story, but just put in some missions where there's a certain goal. Even if you have a partially built base and you have a mission where you need to produce 30 units of metal, or you need to produce 50 medical supplies, or you need to reach a population of X number, or you need to have 10 robots, or, you know, just little things. Like maybe you have a mission where it's non-stop meteor strikes, or maybe you have a mission where there's a constant sandstorm that never stops. Maybe you have a mission that is perpetual nighttime, so you can't even use your solar panels and you have to rely on wind. Just some ways to sort of mix it up and give people a bit more variety when sort of playing the game. That would be my suggestion, but obviously I think a lot of that is going to depend on how well the game does and how much time and resources the developer could funnel back into the game to improve it. But from what I've seen of the game, it certainly seems solid and stable. I've not had any issues with performance. I've not seen any crashes. I've not seen any bugs apart from the aforementioned slightly questionable pathfinding sometimes. There's been a few graphical glitches. Sometimes these storage containers, which normally stack one on top of another, the smaller ones do at least, I've seen where ones get taken from the bottom and you get left with sort of crates floating in midair, but it's a minor graphical glitch. It doesn't, you know, it's not game-changing in any shape or form. As you can see now, we're also at a point here where we're starting to run out of water. So again, we've got to go and build ourselves another water extractor. Even though we do actually have a water tank here that's run out of water already. But again, this is the issue you get as you build the base. As the base gets bigger, it requires more oxygen, it requires more water, it requires more power. So you end up building those things. Those things require more materials and more maintenance. That maintenance means you then need more factories and more mines to produce the raw materials. And, you know, you basically just end up going around and round in circles. But for a lot of people, that is where the enjoyment comes in games like this. And it's actually quite addictive, and this is the reason why I've been rabbiting on in this first impressions for 45 minutes, because I just don't want to stop playing. You know, it's nice sometimes just to get things going, hit fast forward, and see what happens. See how long it takes for things to progress. See how far you can get. Hopefully this will get the water back on board. There we go. So you can click on any of these buildings, by the way, and it does tell you what your production and consumption is for each of these available things. Maybe that could be a little bit easier to get to. If you want to see the water usage, you have to click on one of the water buildings. If you want to see the power usage, you have to click on one of the power buildings. As you can see, we are not producing as much power as we are using, but we do have storage. There's also a few other things that we've got in here as well. You've also got charts that will keep track of your various materials, so you can have a look and see where you're gaining and losing stuff. You've got your text. You've got manufacturing limits when you have a factory, so you can limit how much stuff of each type can be built. But apart from that, everything else is pretty basic. It's a fairly easy game to understand the mechanics and get to grasps with. But you're certainly going to have to restart the game a few times to have a successful playthrough. So this has been Planetbase. You can find it now on Steam. And yeah, if you like colonial games, if you like settlement games, survival games like Banished, I would recommend checking it out. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye for now.